Ann-Kristin, thank you so much for talking to us. You spent almost 3.5 years in Ukraine, and I would say that these years have been really crucial for Ukraine and for Ukrainian reforms. So I would ask you about your assessment of the progress on reforms. What has been done, in your opinion, positively, and what not, and why?
Okay, that's a big question. Then I think I'll probably select a positive thing, a very critically good thing that has happened, and that is the adoption of the new law on national security. We call it usually the LNS, and that was adopted in June in Ukraine. And that will be the platform for further very important reform for Ukraine. I don't know how much you want me to go into detail on that. It was a long struggle, but in the end we ended with something that I think will be a stepstone for further very critical legislation that will put Ukraine on the path towards, or even secure the path towards Euro-Atlantic integration.
You have been working obviously in the security sector.
Yes.
What was the hardest thing to do and why?
Oh, the hardest thing. I think in the beginning, the hardest thing was probably the cultural difference. I'm Norwegian. We're not hierarchical. We're a small country. So we can't really afford to have very big differences between people. So I am probably a little bit direct, a little bit blunt sometimes when talking to people of high rank. And maybe in the beginning that was a little bit of a getting used to me. But in the end we had very good working relations with the Reform Center of the SSU. And we finished a concept of the SSU reform in July 2016. Mm-hmm. And since then we have been waiting for, we have been encouraging the implementation. And hopefully now that we have the law on national security, that will be the next step in order to reform the security service of Ukraine. The most difficult part, I think, has been sometimes we use terminology differently. Sometimes things are lost in translation. And also I think that we have very different cultures. This is obviously a post-Soviet transformational country. Some of the institutions are not functioning or working in the way that I am used to. There can be lots of positive development made by reforming, and I'm thinking then especially about delegation of responsibility, transparency, coordination. These three are the key words.
Well, transparency was one of the main, I would say, demands of the society after the revolution of dignity, especially in security service.
Yes.
And especially, at the days of the Russian aggression.
Mm-hmm.
But still this institution, the security service, remains one of the most closed. It's impossible to see the declarations. There's lack of mechanisms to control it and for the institution to report to the society. Why is that so hard to reform, in your opinion?
I think we have a chance now, because I think that the law on SSU is actually also mentioned in the new law on national security, and it spells out very clearly what it should do. And especially another important thing about that law is also the oversight committee. You were talking about transparency. There will be a special committee in the Verkhovna Rada that will be able to, mandated to, oversee all legally mandated agencies in Ukraine that use covert or intrusive methods. Mm-hmm. This is by law already adopted. So now we just have to see this implementation. And this implementation will come in forms of the law on SSU and this law on the oversight committee. When it comes to declarations, etc., I can only say that in my country they do declare. There are ways of hiding the
Sure.
identities of these people, of course, that's necessary, but it can be done. Another thing you mentioned was, what was that, transparency?
And the mechanisms of control, yeah, you already
control.
mentioned the
Yes.
committee.
Yes, and so the Domestic Security Service is a very normal thing in a democracy. And their task is to protect democracy. And their task is to show people that that is what they're doing. So in the future, we would very much like to see a yearly annual open report. This is what we did, and this is why. And this is also a thing that they did for the first time in 2014. Now we need to see a continuing development on this area. And I think that this committee, Oversight Committee, once it is stood up, would be instrumental and helping the different institutions to open up and be transparent.
It's interesting that you don't mention the political will. Do you have a feeling that it's also, and most certainly, mostly about the political will, or rather lack of political will in Ukraine, to change and to make the security sector more transparent? How do you overcome that lack of political will?
Well, I must say that lately, for instance, during Poroshenko's speech during the Constitution Day, he said, if I didn't misunderstand him, my Ukrainian is not that strong, he said that our course is steadfast towards Euro-Atlantic integration. And that must mean, I cannot understand it differently, that he and the political establishment wants to make it possible to include the security service into the Euro-Atlantic family of such services. I think that's what I can say on that.
And in your opinion, who is actually the main driver of the reforms in security sector? Is that the civil society together with international donors and partners? Who is actually driving that?
Back in 2015, when I started working with it, we had, I think, a healthy mix of people in the working group from the start. It was included MPs, NGO, I think DCAF was involved. So, but there has been a little bit of a standstill after 2016 that I'm hoping very much now will pick up speed. And I would also say that it would be very good to have those key personnel that you mentioned in this now new start on the reform. NGOs, international institutions, people who understand the area.
So it's still, because in my opinion, as a representative of civil society, so to say, the majority of changes in Ukraine are driven by the civil society and international community together, and very often the reforms which are really happening, they are just happening instead of the political will. So there's a lot of pressure against it. Is this something that you already also faced, during this 3 years' time here in Ukraine?
I think then I would rather focus on the political help that we have had during this process, which has resulted in this newly adopted law on security that we find to be a step in the right direction. It is not a fantastic law, but it is, I think we should say, it was the art of the possible, and it puts us, Ukraine, Euro-Atlantic partners, on the road in the right direction. So, and of course there were people involved in the whole thing when we were drafting that were wanting the right thing, also politicians.
For the past 3 years, of course, the main reason why we are not so dynamic, on reforms, this is what we hear from the government, is the main reason is war. So how do you build that balance, and how really war is a huge obstacle to reform the country, in your opinion?
I would maybe be a little bit provocative in saying that the war can really enhance reform, because it will very clearly point at what is weak and what should be strengthened, and what is obsolete and is not needed anymore. So yes, of course, you are fighting in the east, and that has to be taken into consideration. But it can't be a pillow to sleep on until better times.
Have you heard yourself personally from the people that you were working here in Ukraine, from the generals, colonels telling you that, but we are at war, we cannot do that, we cannot do this? I mean, there's a huge risk, we should...
Well, yes, of course, I've heard these things in occasions, and then I usually say that...
What was your argument here?
Then I would say that there are other countries who have reformed during full-scale war, but they were not facing so big problems as you were. That's very true. But war itself can also be seen as the reform, the mother of all reform. It is a force that forces you to change.
In Ukraine, we are hearing from the government that there should be a number of restrictions taken in order to protect ourselves.
Yes.
We need to be aware that there's an enemy. We need to take a number of steps, be it our virtual life, ban a number of websites, and then ban a number of TV channels and newspapers, and also take care of people who might be, spies or enemies or whatever. But at the same time, the civil society of Ukraine, which, came and took part in the Revolution of Dignity, demanding life in an open society and transparent society. It's that sort of a dilemma.
Yeah, I see. It's a very difficult balance. But I think that sometimes, in order to do good, they make mistakes. And this is my personal opinion. To monitor websites or people who are saying the wrong things or trying to make propaganda, etc., that's fine. But to close them down may not be the best way of doing it, because if you close things down, it will not stop happening, but you will just not see where it is happening. So it might be dangerous, actually. So I'm saying this because back in the 80s we had a big discussion in Norway because of the Nazism that we saw was growing a little bit in our societies. And there was a big discussion, should we allow them to say this? Or should we introduce censorship, etc.? And then the assessment was that if we shut them down every time we see them, and we prohibit it completely, we cannot monitor what they're doing. They will go underground, and the threat will be bigger because we don't know what's going on. So this is a way of looking at it also. But that was not war. But
it's different, sure.
It's different. And also we have this quite interesting discussions going on now when we have neo-Nazis marching in our streets. We do allow it. Some people think it's terrible. Other people think that that's the best way of keeping it in check, to have it open.
So you think it's a sort of a control mechanism to see it happening and to realize the scale of the problem?
I would say it's more of a managing, it's more monitoring. And it's also what a democracy does sometimes, letting different voices speak. Your case is different because you're under attack. We are not as such, but it's a very fine balance. What to censor, what not to censor, etc.
We see that it's a hard balance, and we see that it's a lot of discussions, and we see that actually we lack these discussions because we lack platforms for civilized cultural discussion. We lack the culture of debate, and that is also one of the problems that we're facing. But still, is there an example of a country which is dealing with this dilemma more successfully than Ukraine? I don't know. Among Ukrainian military or people who are dealing with security, you would quite frequently hear the example of Israel. Israel is like a country number one for many in Ukraine in terms of dealing with its own security and taking care of its own society. Have you heard that example all the time, that Ukraine should become like Israel? And what do you think about it?
No, I can't say I have heard that at all. No. Maybe, well, sometimes I use Israel, but that's more about how they actually include women in their armed forces. So no, I haven't heard that.
You haven't heard
actually.
that?
No.
That's interesting. Maybe it's something that is out there in the public.
They might not want to say that to me. Who knows?
Why? What would the argument be to those who think that that's the best way to do things?
Like the Israelis, I can't have a opinion about it because I don't know about Israel to that extent that I can give any useful answers.
Okay, back to the women, to the things that you were dealing directly with and the draft laws that you were working with. So in your opinion, just over these 3.5 years, how much has been done in that direction? How far have we gone?
On the security sector?
Yes.
I would say that how to say this diplomatically, the law will be another start again. Because I was hoping that all the work we did up until 2016 would be the start of the whole reform process. It didn't happen. Now we have the new law and there's a deadline. There needs to be a new law on SSU drafted by January 2019. That's already in the law.
But how accessible the army has become for the Ukrainian women?
I think I'm not good with the numbers and years, but 2016, I think more than 60 positions were opened for women, and I think the law 6109 something was adopted, which lifts also the age limits for when women can sign contracts with the Ukrainian Armed Forces. And I was actually not aware that women can only do that between the age of 18 and 40, which explains why there are no female generals, for instance. Have you ever seen a general who's under 40 years old?
Yeah,
not
but
so
have you ever seen a female general in Ukraine?
No.
No, not one.
No, I have seen women who should have been generals. That's a different question. But in the future, we'll see.
That's interesting. What's your impression on how women are actually treated in these circles, the security and military? Of course, you are yourself a woman, and probably there is a difference between how they treat you as a foreigner and as an advisor and other women who are there in the sphere working. What were your impressions?
A little bit too much serving of coffee, I think.
Taking notes?
Yes, taking notes, being interpreters, being not the main spokesperson, but how to say, in the beginning, I've been working in male-dominated areas for all my life. I have learned some tricks. For instance, when I was younger, when I was traveling in the former Soviet Unions with my colleagues, male, younger colleagues, I knew that I would never be taken for the head of the delegation, so we had a little trick. I told my male colleagues, you carry my bag. When we get into the room, you go and you give me my bag. And then the head of the other delegation will understand that I am the one he's going to talk to, not you.
That's a trick.
It's a good trick. It worked.
Did it work?
It worked.
It worked.
Because he was then really doing like this. And then I said, thank you, you can sit. And then they would... So then I would not embarrass them when they understood that I was actually their counterpart, not this young man. So and Ukraine, I'm older now, so it's easier.
And what about women and their understanding how should they build their careers in security sector? Probably it's not only about how men are treating them. It's also something that is out of the professional sphere. It's also something that they face back at home with their families, with their mothers and fathers.
Yeah, there are different issues, and I understand it's going to be a struggle. We have, I think now, 5 female generals in Norway, and they are older than me, and it probably would be very interesting for you to interview them, how they did this in their lives. There are different issues that Ukrainian women face. They do not have the support at home, I think, that Scandinavian women would expect from their husbands. In terms of equal childcare, for instance, who stays home if the child is sick? Me or you? Mm-hmm. Usually it would be the woman here, I suppose. I don't know, I'm just guessing. But it seems
automatically.
Automatically.
Otherwise, they will need to have a discussion.
Yes, but in our society it's not like that anymore. It's equally hard to, if I have a young man working for me and he gets a baby, I'm thinking, oh, then he'll be gone a lot, you know. While before you would, and officers in our service would, for instance, say, doesn't that child have a father if the woman is away because the child is sick?
Interesting. That is something that you wouldn't normally hear in Ukraine.
So this is new, and they don't think that it should be the woman's main task to stay at home with the child. So I see these women running around, doing very good job in the professional life, and then they run a small factory at home, which of course makes it hard to fulfill a dream of a career in a professional way. I can imagine.
We know that it's a long way to go, and it also didn't take in Norway like a
No.
year or two or three. How long is this way in 2018 for a country like Ukraine?
Well, in Norway, the Equal Opportunities Act was adopted in 1984. I think things have moved quite quickly the last years in Ukraine. I think there is more exciting things happening than I ever would have expected. The changes in the laws, and also this new female, well, it's not a battalion really, but we had this Constitution Day show. I was not completely happy with it. It's a nice step forward, but they should be together with the men, I think. Probably take a generation, that's normal.
Have you talked to those women about what were their impressions on their participation?
No, unfortunately I haven't.
As to the men in the military, generals, colonels, what were their impressions? What they were telling you, like, see, now we have a female battalion marching?
Yes.
Parading?
No, Ann-Kristin, you will be happy. There is a whole new, nice female battalion marching. I think it's a little misunderstood. I don't want there to be all female battalions. I want there to be a normal thing that if you're a woman and you think you can do a good job in the armed forces, then it should be normal for you to do so. Shouldn't be strange or exotic or anything.
How about your choices, career choices? How did you end up with a job like this, and how do you build on a life-work balance?
What to say? I think the best career move you ever do is choosing the right husband, first of all. And then we have in Norway very good childcare. So you can work outside the home without being afraid that your child doesn't get the right education, the right food, etc. So my children has been in kindergarten since they were small, all the way, and have been working 100% all the time, and in a male-dominated environment. But Norway decided that they wanted to encourage women to join. So we have had quite good conditions for, if you are a young mother, you can bring the baby to work if needed for, feeding and that, or the father. So it's very family friendly, even in the armed forces. So, no, what to say? How else did I end up here? I'm not sure.
But what about other challenges that you face as a female professional in security sector, apart from a family part that you need to take care of?
In Ukraine, you mean?
In Ukraine and both in Norway too.
Well, in Norway not so much anymore, because I'm now older. Nobody wants to sort of make jokes about my age and looks, and also I'm used to it. In Ukraine, sometimes I want to laugh a little bit when the men just pass me directly and say hello to the next man, and then the beautiful lady, and that's always a little. I'm feeling it's quite old-fashioned in a way. I don't find it. I find it a little bit sweet, but something that belongs in maybe 20, 50 years ago, I'm not sure.
So it's not like that in Norway anymore?
No.
Nobody would do that to
No,
a
no, no, no.
young woman, for example, just starting her career?
No, that would be considered inappropriate to make any remarks on the looks of anybody. It doesn't have anything to do with the way you do your work.
Talking about accessibility of the army and of the armed forces, in Norway, females can apply and have a job in special operation forces.
They can.
Which is not like that, not the fact yet in Ukraine. Why do you think it is so hard to change that?
Well, first of all, it is hard to get that kind of position also in Norway, because I just looked at some numbers. In 2015, 1,400 girls applied and 10 were accepted because of the physical demands are very high. But they accepted, they passed it, and they did it. The problem is now to retain these girls, because they're highly competitive, highly smart, and very interested in personal development. But there's been written a research report on the whole experiment, and it's ongoing. So
the experiment is ongoing.
Yeah, well, it's not an experience anymore. It's more like this is happening. Why it's hard in Ukraine? I don't know. I suppose SOF is new in Ukraine.
But do they serve together with the men?
Yeah.
So it's mixed groups. They don't.
Well, this one group, this hunter platoon, they are a hunter platoon. It's them. But in the future, if they can pass the physical demands, why not? That would be stupid.
Recently, we had a case of a young woman who was trying to apply for a military academy in Lviv. You probably heard about.
I heard about that.
Yes, and she was denied.
I asked why.
We also asked.
Yes, I asked actually one of our advisors here who advise on NCO development, and he says, well, I don't know. I think it's because it's a experimental course, which makes it even more strange to me, because then why not?
That's interesting. We got a different answer. They told us that the problem is that females and males have to live separately, and unfortunately they don't have enough space to accommodate these women. They cannot live together, or they cannot live in the neighboring rooms for some reason. Still also a question. And this young woman, she told us that she also doesn't want to comment on that, and she's pretty okay with that decision because she understands it.
Okay. Well, what can I say? There are different cultures in different countries. In my country now, we have national service. That means that all boys and girls have to serve. The ones who are selected from a year to 1.5 years. And some of them even share bedrooms, dormitories. Like, I don't know how many they live, 6 or 8 in one room. And it seems actually to reduce harassment and bullying to have them mixed.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's quite new, so we still haven't done the final assessment, I think. But those were the good things that I heard.
Also, it's a long way to go for Ukraine, but we'll see, maybe.
Yeah, well, only the ones born in 97 and younger, both sexes have to serve.
You are leaving Ukraine quite soon.
Yes.
Other things that you would still like to do or work on more, or things that you would that you regret that you haven't done?
I would dearly like to see the SSU concept signed by the president, so we could help with an actual implementation plan. Because I'm a true Ukraine patriot. I think that we shouldn't be afraid of change. I think some of the reason why it has taken time is that SSU is a strong and efficient service, and probably there is a little bit of a fear that if they change it could be weaker. I think it could only be stronger. And I'm also saying we don't want revolution, we want evolution. We want slow transfer of tasks and functions into other agencies that would be then strengthening the democracy of Ukraine.
What should we as civil society keep our eyes on in terms of reforming our security sector? What should we focus on and really be there for the change?
I would say you need to, that's up to you, but I think that keeping an eye on the law on this oversight committee would be very important. What kind of access will it have? What kind of mandate will it have? Because it's already in the law. It has to happen, but how will it work? So that's the next thing.
Getting back to the work-life balance.
Yeah.
You already said about the life choices and how it is important to have a right partner near you to
always useful
to make it work. But still, as any person, any normal person, everybody has their own practices on how they relax, and what they do to relax. What do you personally do? It's a stressful work.
Yes, and in Ukraine it has been more or less work all the time, because it's hard not to think about it, because it's been extremely interesting and challenging, and I'm trying not to think about work all the time, but I do anyway. But I have some hobbies, of course. I try to get around to see Ukraine a little bit. In the weekends I like to wander about in Kyiv, and I do a little painting and I read a lot. And unfortunately I'm watching Netflix a little bit too much.
That's a huge library, just a video library now.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, would you mind telling us a few words about your pictures?
No, of course not.
Yeah, let's go.
Yes.
Let's go and see them.
My personal favorites, I have two. This one. This is called The Heart of Winter. And this one I think I made because when I came to Ukraine, first time, it was December 2014, I think. And the atmosphere was very different than it is now. It was foggy. You had this feeling that everybody was very intense and felt betrayed. And I saw people around the streets who obviously did not belong in Kyiv, fleeing from the east. And I got the very strong feeling of despair. And it was winter and it was cold. And then I thought, but still there was something, you know, there was this energy, there was this fantastic feeling of we want to do it, we want to fight. And this is the heart of the whole, you know, this is the volunteers, these are the NGOs, all the good forces still existing in winter. You see the heart is suffering, but it's still red and it's still pumping. So heart of winter.
And how long did it take you?
This one, I start and then I stop and then I go back and then I stop. I don't know, a month maybe, not sure. Because, and then I'm usually not thinking that this will be it. I have a total different opinion of what it is I'm painting, and then suddenly, oh, it's this. So
it's just an exhibition right here in the office, but normally it is back at your home,
yes.
And you see it every day.
Yes, I do. This one this is every day. Yeah.
What about the others?
This is sort of more of a Kyiv cityscape, I would say. I am from Norway. We like open lands. We're not open landscapes. We like nature, and Kyiv is a big city. But I've learned to love also very ugly apartment blocks and smoke, and because there's so much life inside, and I'm always watching through my windows, thinking, aha, this is alive. I wonder what's going on there. That's alive.
In that window.
Then you see these people that are sort of moving around. So a little nature in the city.
And what's the district, if there's a district, or it's just?
This is Bogdana Khmelnytskaya, across from my house, which is Dom Pisateley. So it's a very...
Yes, it used to have these mosaics, yes.
Yeah, well, but it's all quite... how to say, it's more the impressions than the actual how it looks. This is very sad. This is listening to the world news.
Yeah, we're so sorry. We make you feel like that.
No, this is not you, actually. This is Aleppo when it was burning.
Okay.
And I don't know, that period, everything sort of was burning in the world. And then that just happened. I was just painting and...
So is it from earlier times, or
No,
you
also
already
here.
were working here as
Yeah.
you were here in
Yes,
Ukraine?
yes. Because I have a room where I have all my painting stuff, and I was listening to the radio, and then suddenly this sad thing happened. And then something more maybe encouraging. I was telling you how the views are very important, you know? And in our conversation we have been talking about it also. There are different types of view, you know? Points of view, I would say. So when you ask me about what would be the differences, what are the hardest things to answer, etc., it's because I see it from my perspective. Ukrainians see it from a different perspective, and then it's the question of reaching a point of understanding in a way. And some of the hard things that hasn't been achieved with the reforms that I've been doing is to do with the fact that we hadn't found a common language maybe, but I think now we can. So anyway, perspective. So this is a window, and I live in a block of flats. I am looking out every night, looking at the different things I see. And then I was thinking, and then there's a big moon. And then I was thinking, well, the moon is the same everywhere. So this is called night on Earth. Yeah. So you have here Africa. I try to. Those are supposed to be giraffes, or maybe llamas. I'm not sure. And this is, I think, somewhere in Central Asia. You know, with the big deserts. And then we have Kyiv here, on the left bank.
Oh yes.
With the blocks of flats. And this is Norway, you know, with the fjords and the boats, etc. So, night on Earth. Different perspectives, different lives, so many lives.
It's beautiful.
And one thing in common, the moon, everywhere. So, very philosophical.
What is there in common? What is there so much in common between Norway and Ukraine?
Oh, I think I know. Ukrainians are very pluralistic. You can't tell you what to do, because you won't do it unless you want to, right? Norwegians the same. They can give us rules and regulations, but you're like, we'll think about it.
Wait a second.
Wait a second, I'll think about it. And that's what I like with Ukraine. You are a functioning democracy. Lots of things that don't work yet, but it's a functioning democracy. And you've shown time and time again that you want this thing. You want to go this direction. And I think we are a little bit the same like that.
Sounds like true.
Yeah, I think so. And also we have this Viking heritage and everything. I'm actually collecting words that are the same in Ukrainian and Norwegian. And there are quite many.
Oh, like what? Like Viking?
No, not Viking. For instance, Viking is Viking. But you know, we have plug. Saker, sukker. Ambar. Lots of them. Doctor is in Norwegian lækjar, and you have liker. So there are lots of them. But so in the beginning I had like a little hobby to write them down. So I think we have some common. And I see,
a lot of things. Yes.
A little bit of this anarchistic
spirit,
I think. Yes.
Yeah, something like that.